Welcome to part 3 of my 8-part series on science in the Bible. I strongly suggest that you listen to the parts in sequence. Enjoy! Now, let's take a look at our course outline. Last week we talked about the nature of the battle, the biblical foundations of science, and facts, theories, and the scientific method. I'm going to give you a little review of that material, and then tonight we're going to focus on these two topics: origins and processes, and the origin of the universe. Next week, our attention will be focused on the theory of evolution, and in the final week, we will be talking about the age of the earth, the age of the universe. Some of this material may spill over into the fourth week, because the material for the third week is really big. Okay? All right. Let's review what we saw during our first session. We saw that in the debate about origins, there are three key questions. The first one has to do with the origin of the universe. Where did the universe come from? The second one has to do with the origin of life. And the third one has to do with the nature of reality. This is really, in some ways, the most important question. Now, we talked a little bit about what's at stake in this debate. One of the things that's at stake in this debate is money, prestige, and academic power. Now, when I was working at Cornell University at the Lab of Nuclear Studies, by the way, I was not a theoretical physicist. Those were the really smart guys. I was an experimentalist. I was a nuts and bolts kind of person, making the accelerators work and building instrumentation and things like that. We were considering making a proposal to build something bigger than what we had. Now, what we had was an underground electron-positron storage ring. Some of you have heard about CERN. You see things about that on YouTube all the time. What we had was kind of a smaller version of that. CERN circulates protons and antiprotons in a large evacuated ring. We were circulating electrons and positrons. Now, we were considering making a proposal to the National Science Foundation to increase the size of our facility and make it much larger. And one of the things that was interesting about that process is that how you write grant proposals is extremely important. If you write the proposal well, if you can convince the National Science Foundation that what you want to do is going to advance science or is going to have payoffs in technology or medicine, you've got a chance at getting the money. If you can't convince them, you won't get the money. And if you don't get money, your experiment shuts down and you lose your job. Now, that was true in the area of physics, it's true in the area of biology, it's true in agriculture, it's true in virtually any field of research. So, in this debate, where we're talking about origins of the universe and origins of life, people who are in the fields of cosmology and people who are in the field of biology have a lot to lose if their view is discredited. Now, probably next week or maybe in the last week, I will provide you with a bibliography of books and in one case a movie that you probably should watch. These tell the stories of people who were well-respected researchers who used the word design or suggested that life was designed and who lost their jobs, who were blacklisted and were kicked out of the scientific community. Very harshly, very unfairly, and it wasn't because they weren't good scientists. These are good scientists doing good science, investigating a possibility that needs to be investigated, and that's the possibility that life is designed. Now, those of us who believe the scriptures are convinced that life is designed on the basis of the scriptures. But I think the evidence, quite apart from the scriptures, is very clear that life is designed and it's not an accident. So money, prestige, and academic power are very much at stake in this debate. Now, the next thing that's at stake is authority. The question is, Are we an accident, which means we are under our own authority and there's no one higher than us? Or are we creatures made by God, made in His image, which means that He has the right to tell us how to live? Right? Now, another thing that's at stake is morality. This one's a little harder to see, but really, if life and if mankind are accidents, then they have no intrinsic value. If there is no God, who is to say what is right and what is wrong? Now, there have been times in history when some very powerful empires have just taken over portions of the world, and they say, what we say is right and everybody is wrong. And they kill those who don't agree with them. This bears on issues like abortion and euthanasia. Is it right to take the life of a fetus in the womb? Is that fetus a human being? Is it an evolutionary accident? What is it? What about old people who seem to be near the end of life, but who don't want to die? There are some people who say, well, they are what Hitler called them, useless eaters. And since there are limited resources on the earth, perhaps mankind has the right to get rid of useless eaters. Now, I don't think any of us in this room would be in favor of that, and I'm certainly not in favor of it. But as we debate about the nature of life, these are the kinds of things that come up. Now, lastly, there's the significance and purpose of life. What is life for? If we are an accident, if at the end, when we stop breathing, when our hearts stop working, when we die physically, if that's the end of existence, then what was the point of the whole thing in the first place? If when you die, you stop existing, what's the value of life? Now, I remember before I became a Christian, when I was in college, I was very much committed to atheism. And I won't go into details, but I came from a very dysfunctional family, and there was a terrible event that separated me from 3 of my siblings, and I did not know whether they were alive or dead for 13 years. And during that time, I thought very seriously about the purpose of life and what life was about. And my thinking went this way. Since I don't believe there's a God, since I don't believe there's a purpose for life, I know 2 things are true. I know I'm going to die, and I know I'm going to experience pain between now and when I die. And I don't like pain. So I found myself thinking, wouldn't the smart thing be to kill myself? Now, I never became suicidal. I never got to the point where I wanted to do that. I had a passion to stay alive, as all healthy human beings do. But without the understanding that we are created by God for a purpose, that we bear His image, that He is pleased at our existence, and that He wants to have a relationship with us, suicide is a rational thought. Okay, so there's a lot at stake in this debate. Now, we spent some time last week looking at worldviews. Worldviews matter because they influence our view of the nature of reality, and your view of the nature of reality will determine to some extent what you investigate in your efforts to understand this universe. Now, purely materialistic science skews the debate by refusing to consider non-physical realities. This is one of the things that's at the lowest level and most fundamental level of the debate between what I call establishment science and those who are willing to take a theistic worldview and look at science from that perspective. Okay? Modern science is based on the biblical worldview that the universe is orderly and it's controlled by universal laws. Now, we saw last time that even though this is the foundation of modern science rejected the basis upon which it got that foundation a long time ago. Most scientists today do not have a biblical worldview, but they still retain the idea that the universe is orderly and it's controlled by universal physical laws.
Thank you.
Now that viewpoint does make possible the scientific method. Now last time we talked about facts, about theories, and about physical laws. Now let's review what these are. Facts are observable realities. Now as we said last time, if you brought a bunch of scientists into a room, some creationists, some atheists, from all different backgrounds, if they're good scientists and you ask them to measure the properties of some physical object or system, they would all come up with basically the same conclusions. Right? Facts are things that we observe. They're not debatable. If we know how to measure them, we're always going to come to the same conclusions. All right? Now theories and hypotheses, I could put hypothesis here as well. Theories and hypotheses are attempts to explain observed facts. Okay? Now, here we're talking about, let's say, the kind of rock that's on the face of the moon. I don't know much about the rock that's on the face of the moon, but there are different theories about the geology of the moon. And different theories regarding the geology would have different explanations for how the rock that you find on the face of the moon came to have its properties. Why does it have that density? Why does it have that color? Why does it have that kind of porosity? Why does it not have layers like stratigraphic, rock strata that we would find on the Earth? Theories are attempts to explain facts. And then physical laws are basically universally accepted theories. When a theory has been published, when it's been tested, when all scientists are convinced that it's true, we call it a universal physical law. Now the last thing that we did last time is that we talked about deduction and induction. Remember those? Deduction is where you start with a certain premise and you compare a situation that fits that premise and you draw a conclusion. And we saw that deduction allows you to come to 100% certain conclusions, but it's rather limited because we don't have that many absolutely certain premises to start with. Now what we saw also is that induction is the method that science uses, right? Induction is what you do when you make many observations of the same system or the same animal or the same planet or the same motion of the asteroids, whatever it might be, and attempt to draw conclusions from those many observations. Now we saw that since induction moves from many specific observations to general conclusions, it can never produce absolute certainty. Okay, induction can never produce absolute certainty. It can produce a very high level of certainty, but not absolute certainty. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Okay? Now let's focus on what scientists call physical laws. Now remember, I told you last time there's two ways in which this phrase physical law is used. One is what scientists are convinced are physical laws through the process of experimentation. The other is what we call the essential physical law, which is the way the universe actually works. Now, aside from God telling us that, we don't really know essential physical law. We can only know what we discover by induction. And by the way, my purpose in this course is not to make you doubt everything that science teaches. Right? Please don't get that impression. I worked in the field of science. I was highly impressed by it. I use it. I rely on it. We all do. Right? Most of what science teaches is highly reliable because it's been well tested. Right? My purpose is not to make you doubt everything that science teaches. My purpose is to make you aware of the errors in the logic and argumentation that are used in the discussion of origins, the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and fundamental views on the nature of reality. Okay? Now, what a scientist calls a physical law is really just a hypothesis or a theory that's so widely accepted that it is considered to be beyond doubt. Now here's an example from history. Newton's law, F equals ma. Many of you remember this from physics class, and most of you probably hated it. I actually loved physics in high school. The thing that bothered me about physics class, you know what it was? I was going through high school in the early 1970s, just around the time when Texas Instruments started making electronic calculators. And all the wealthy kids in class had those calculators. But my family was very poor. The rest of us had slide rules. And very often, when we take a test or a quiz, it really came down to who could work faster, with the calculator or the slide rule. So I practiced and I practiced and I got really good with the slide rule. And when I went away to college and I majored in physics, by then everybody had a calculator, and by then I could afford a calculator. But just for spite, I went all through college using only a slide rule. Okay. That tells you how obnoxious I am. All right. Well, F equals ma is Newton's second law, which he formulated in 1686. This is a long time ago. And it was confirmed countless times over 250 years. This law enabled astronomers to calculate and predict the motions of the planets, to understand the motion of the moon around the Earth, to understand projectile motion, to draw up tables that would predict exactly where a cannonball would land if you shot it out of a cannon. This is an incredibly powerful physical law. Okay? It was confirmed over and over and over. There was no doubt about it. And then, in the early 1900s, Einstein comes along. And by the way, he wasn't looking for it. He was forced into it by his research. Einstein is forced to recognize something that today we call special relativity. And special relativity says that when objects are moving at a significant percentage of the speed of light, F equals ma doesn't work anymore. And the reason it doesn't work, among other things, is that m is no longer a constant as things begin to move close to the speed of light. Well, experimental inductive science will always provide us with less than 100% certainty. Now, we don't throw out Newton's law today. We still use it. But we use it with the understanding that it's only going to be accurate within a certain range of velocities. When things start to move very close to the speed of light, we have to calculate things differently. Right? And scientists know how to do those calculations, by the way. So now we have a better understanding of motion. But maybe we don't have a perfect understanding of motion. All right? Now, when people say that the Bible is unscientific or science disproves the Bible, this really involves an error of logic. First of all, the scientific method only deals with repeatable events. And secondly, most attacks on the Bible concern unique events of history, including origins and miracles. And miracles are not natural. Miracles are supernatural. Now, here the question comes in, is there any such thing as the supernatural? And most scientists would say no. People who believe in Scripture would say yes. And we would go farther. We would say that there is evidence of the supernatural. Not just in the stories of Scripture, but in the evidence outside of Scripture that confirms the stories of Scripture. Okay, and that's a topic for another course. Now, history, including miracles, is not repeatable. And this is important. Observation and experimentation are not the only valid sources of information. They can't be used to investigate historic events. When you're investigating historic events, you need physical evidence left over, and you need testimony. And testimony is documents and literature. This is why archaeology is so important. This is why it's so important to learn ancient languages, to read the literature that's left behind by ancient cultures. And of course, the most trustworthy source of ancient testimony is the Bible. Only God was present to testify of creation. Right? Now, I realize that those who don't accept the Bible as an authority would disagree with that point. But we're trying to examine this whole issue from the perspective of those who are committed to the authority of Scripture. Now, where do miracles fit in? Well, by definition, miracles are events in which natural laws are violated or suspended. Can these fit into a scientific worldview? Well, in a purely materialistic scientific worldview, there can't be miracles, because physical laws are viewed as part of the self-existent fabric of the universe, and there is not considered to be anything higher than the universe. The universe just does what it does because it is what it is. All right? Now, in a theistic scientific worldview, miracles are possible. Now, by the way, a theistic scientist doesn't throw out physical law. He doesn't throw out his physics books and his biology books and those things. He is working 99% of the time using the same rules, the same laws, the same theories as all other scientists are using. In this view, God is the eternal, self-caused, self-existent reality, and the universe is created by Him, and physical laws do what they do because He has declared that they should. Now, this is an interesting thing to think about. If you have the biblical worldview, if you are a Bible believer, if you think about the entire universe, everything in the universe, every single thing in the universe obeys God perfectly. Everything. Matter does what it's supposed to do. There are only two things in the universe that don't obey God. I don't know if I said this last week. You know what they are? Fallen angels and human beings. We are the only things in the universe that don't obey God. But we're also very special, aren't we? Because we are the only things in the universe that have personality and spirituality and morality. That makes us of very special value to God. And that's one of the reasons why He is working to redeem us. Now, it is possible to have a theistic and scientific worldview. Now, contrary to popular objections, these things are fully compatible once the limitations of the scientific method and the reality of the supernatural are taken into account. Now, your typical Bible-believing scientist is not going to be trying to explain everything he observes by saying, an angel did it. He's going to be like every other scientist. He's going to expect things to obey physical law. And unless something happens which is extraordinarily unusual and there's reason to consider the possibility of the supernatural, he's not going to consider the supernatural either. Right? Okay, well, that's our review. I want to move now into our first topic, which is origins and processes. Okay, and we're going to be talking tonight about the origin of the universe. Next week, we're going to be talking about the origin of life. And you should be understanding what we're going to be covering tonight in this section as foundational, both for the origin of the universe and for the origin of life. Okay? Now, we need to be clear about these two terms. First, origins. Origins have to do with the question, where did everything that exists come from? If you have children, your children have asked you this question. And we all forget it, but we asked our parents this question. Now, the second issue is processes. Processes have to do with how the first things became the things that exist now. Right? Origins have to do with the start of all things. This takes us back to the beginning of time. And processes have to do with the chain of causes and effects. Now, it's very important that we keep these things separate in our minds, and you'll see why in a little bit. Okay. origins, processes, the start of all things, and the chain of causes and effects. Now, this is a typical scientist. He's a very intelligent person. And he's thinking about the world. And he asks important questions. One of them is, how did the universe come into existence? Another one, what is the foundation of existence? What is the nature of existence? What does it mean for things to exist? Another question, did the universe have a beginning, or has it always existed? Very difficult question. How did life begin and develop? Right? These are very important scientific questions. Now, the theistic scientist comes along. The scientist who holds to the same basic understanding of science as the typical scientist, but who also has a theistic worldview, asks questions also. He asks all of those questions. He's interested in all those, and he asks more. Where did the human soul and spirit come from? Now, this is a really interesting question. There's an ultimate sense of this question, but there's also a very immediate sense of this question. I don't want to be indelicate, so I won't. But most of you in this room have had this experience. There are 2 of you in the room, and then a moment later, there are 3 of you in the room. And nobody entered the room. There are 2 in the room, and then there are 3 in the room. It's called conception. One moment, there are 2 people in the room, a husband and wife, and the next moment, there are 3 people in the room. There's a human life that has just come into existence in the womb of the wife. Now, how did that happen? It's a very interesting question. This is one of the things that we discuss in theology class, by the way, and I'm not going to go into the details of that question, but it's a very interesting question. We know that it happens, don't we? That's where all the people in the world came from. It's quite an amazing thing. How does a human soul and spirit come into existence? Now, even if you don't think that there's a soul and spirit at the moment of conception, at some point in the next 9 months, there is a soul and a spirit. Now, personally, I think it's there from the moment of conception, and it develops. But it's real at the moment of conception. But if you think that life begins 6 months in, well, still, where did it come from? Very interesting question. Here's another one. Scientists ask this question, although I don't know that you can actually research this. What is the source of truth and beauty? Why do we care about truth and beauty so much? We do, don't we? And it's a good thing. Beauty makes life enjoyable. And truth gives us a sense of justice, right? We don't like lies. We like truth. We like honesty. Where do they come from? Why do we believe in right and wrong? This is a really hard one for someone who has a purely materialistic worldview to answer. Evolution does not support the idea of right and wrong. Evolution supports the idea of might makes right. The stronger one is the one who wins. And there have been many empires in history. There were the Assyrians, there were the Babylonians, there were the Romans, there were the Nazis, who convinced themselves that their military power gave them the right to dictate morality and to force other people to do what they wanted them to do. But we know that that isn't the right way to live. There's something innate in us that tells us that there is right and wrong. And then the big question, who is behind all of this. Now, your typical theistic scientist will ask the who question. You notice there's no who up here. Because a purely materialistic scientist does not believe that there is a person behind existence. He believes that the physical world is all there is. It is the foundation of existence. Now, taking us back to worldviews, why do these two different kinds of scientists ask different sets of questions? Well, the typical scientist has a foundational worldview that recognizes only physical realities. Since his worldview doesn't recognize non-physical realities, he refuses to consider them as a possibility. Now, it's interesting. Thomas Jefferson, who some of you have heard of, who was a founding father of the United States of America, was kind of an odd character. It's not at all clear whether he was a Christian. I think he was a theist. He probably was a deist. A deist is a person who believes that God created the universe and he sort of wound it up like a clock, or in modern terminology, he put batteries in it and stood back and just watched it run. Deists don't think that God is actively involved with people and with the universe. Now, Thomas Jefferson made a special Bible. It's called the Jefferson Bible. You can buy one today. It's a Bible in which he took his scissors and he cut everything out of the Bible that he thought was a miracle. Because his view was that God created the world, and once he had created it, he said, I'm not going to interact with it anymore. It's sort of like God being a very clever clockmaker. He makes an incredibly beautiful clock. He puts it inside of a glass jar and then just sits back to watch it tick and do all the things that it does. Okay? He was a little bit like this in that he excluded miracles from his worldview. He said, once the universe came into existence, there cannot be miracles, there cannot be supernatural things. Now, the theist scientist has a foundational worldview that recognizes both physical and non-physical realities. And again, he's not being stupid. He's not denying the reality of the physical world. He's just saying that there are personal realities, there are spiritual realities, and there are supernatural realities. Okay? And personally, I think that this is the more honest worldview. Now, if you remember last week, we talked a little bit about postmodernism. Remember, we said that the modernist worldview is the secular, humanistic, scientific, materialistic worldview. It's basically this kind of worldview. It says that people are the highest thing in the universe, everything is physical, there is no God. Now, the postmodern worldview has developed from modernism. It's a very interesting thing. Postmodernists tend to be scientific materialists, but they're also open to the possibility of spiritual reality. And millennials and younger people are often postmodernists, and they're usually highly tolerant of the religious views of other people. They may have friends who are Buddhist, friends who are Taoist, friends who are atheists, Roman Catholics, Jews, whatever. Now, there's nothing wrong with being friends with people of other religions. I'm not suggesting that. But the reason they're so comfortable around people with all these worldviews is that their worldview says that no worldview is correct. So a postmodernist can be a Buddhist, let's say, but it doesn't bother him that his friends don't agree with his worldview. He's not worried that they're wrong. He thinks what's important is not being right. What's important is being tolerant of other worldviews. Now, because that's his approach, postmodernists tend to be open to some extent to these kinds of realities, personal, spiritual, and supernatural realities. But there's one thing they can't stand. They can't stand the idea of absolute truth. So if you tell a postmodernist, this is true, and the contradiction of it is false, they will usually get upset. This is why it's difficult to share the gospel with postmodernists. And I think I told you this last week when I share the gospel with members of my family. They say, I'm glad that makes you happy. Because they have a postmodernist worldview. But when I say, no, this isn't about what makes me happy. This is about what I believe is the truth. And I believe the truth is exclusive. The truth excludes what contradicts it. That's when they get upset. Okay? But it's rather interesting that postmodernists have room for this kind of a worldview. Now, children. Children ask wonderful questions. Children ask why questions. And they wear us out, don't they? Why? 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 You need to go to bed. Why? So you can sleep. Why? Because if you don't sleep, you won't wake up on time tomorrow. Why? Because you'll be tired. Why? Because your body needs rest. Why is it bad that I wake up late? Because you won't get to school. Well, why is it bad if I don't go to school? You know, and they could just go on and on and on and on. Right? They're very good at this. All right, well, here are some of the why questions that I remember my kids asking. Why is the sky blue? Now, I was able to answer that question because I studied physics. All right? The reason the sky is blue is that the size of the molecules in the air is good at scattering long wavelengths, but it allows short wavelengths to pass through. So we get the blue light. Okay? Why do I need to eat my vegetables? Well, a nutritionist could answer this better than I could, but they would ask this question. And by the way, we had one son who loved vegetables and one who just couldn't get them down. He would gag and throw up if we made him eat vegetables. Why do bees sting? Now, this is an interesting question. Now, you could say, well, bees sting to defend themselves. But the problem is, when a bee stings, it dies. So how is that the bee defending itself? That's a very interesting question, isn't it? It suggests possibly altruism? That the bee loves the other bees? Maybe. Does it suggest divine design? Is a bee dying when it stings going to be helpful in explaining an evolutionary theory of why bees develop stingers? I don't think so. The sting of the bee does not help the bee with the sting to survive, does it? It actually prevents it from surviving. Interesting things going on here, okay? Who made the stars? Well, if you have a biblical view, you can say God made the stars. But then they'll say, well, why are they there? Why are they arranged in that way? Why do people think when they look in the sky they see a lion when all I see is a bunch of dots? You know, questions like that. Why do the stars move like this and the planets do weird things against the background of the stars? Now, this is one that our younger son asked repeatedly. I think I mentioned it last week. Why can't I grow a tail? Our youngest son loved dogs. He loved dogs. We were in the Philippines for about 8 years. He was 3 when we went there. We got him a dog. He had the dog for about 4 weeks, and then a poisonous snake bit it and it died. That was the end of that dog. It was pretty sad. Later on, we got him another dog. But he thought that tails were the coolest thing. You know, he loved to watch his dog. You know, they run around in a circle. Before they lie down, they go like 3 times around. Always the same direction. and then they curl up and wrap their tails around him. Andrew thought it would be really neat to have a tail. Keep him warm, he wouldn't have to carry his little blanket around with him. Right? Kids ask why questions all the time. Now, the answers to why questions always involve two things: cause and effect. All right? And we are all very familiar with cause and effect. We know certain things about it. We know that every effect has a cause. Everything happens because something else makes it happen. Everything happens because something else causes it to happen. Right? Things don't just happen. They happen because something causes them to happen. Right? And every effect acts as a cause for something that follows. Now, today I was thinking about downloading one of those YouTube videos. You ever watch those YouTube videos of the dominoes? People set up dominoes in all kinds of wild patterns. They cover an entire gym floor, and they have flags, they have towers, and then they start the first one and I watched one that had 120,000 dominoes arranged in a triangle. It was a little bigger than this room, and it was set up so that they all fell down within the space of 12 seconds. And it was really noisy. And the interesting thing is that each domino fell because another domino touched it. And when it fell, it touched another domino. Okay? Every effect acts as a cause for something that follows. And we know this: causes always precede their effects. This is why time travel movies don't make any sense. Right? Time travel movies are fun, but they don't make any sense. Because time travel movies are all based on the premise that something in the future can cause an event in the past. See, my hair fell out because somebody set a fire in 2020. Does that make any sense? No. It doesn't make any sense. We all know these things. Now, the chain of causes and effects never ends. It constantly moves forward through time. Now, this is really interesting if you stop and think about it. Do you ever stop and think about time and where we are in time? Time is a strange thing. It only moves in one direction. It's almost like there's a wave going through time, and we are surfing on that wave, and we're caught in this tiny interval between the past and the future. And we're always moving this way. And things in the future can never affect the past, and things in the past always affect the future. It's really interesting to think about. Now, look at this statement for a moment. The chain of causes and effects never ends. And when you watch one of those movies of dominoes going down, it always ends, doesn't it? It always ends. Now, when that last domino falls, does that mean that it is not a cause for some other effect? Is that the end of the process? Not really. When that domino falls, it imparts momentum to the floor, it creates noise, it makes the air move, it releases heat, it may send shock waves through the air. Everything has effects on things that follow. Any event has effects. There is no effect that doesn't act as a cause in some way for something that follows. Now, the effect that it produces may be very small, but it's there. It's there. Now, with this understanding of causes behind us, let's consider a very difficult but very important fact. And that, whoops, wrong button, come back. Ah, my program quit. Hold on. It's coming back. Okay, hold on. I wonder what the cause of that was. Okay. Like the uncaused cause. All right. What happens if we try to trace the chain of causes backward through time? Now, by the way, this is what we are doing when we're trying to answer the question of origins, at least if we're trying to do it from a purely materialistic viewpoint. Okay? One of two things has to be true, and this is worth some reflection. Option A, an infinite series of causes goes backward in time in an eternal sequence that has no beginning. It's just domino before domino before domino before domino before domino. I'm getting tired, but it just keeps going back. There's no beginning. That's one option. The other option is that some eternally existing uncaused cause created the universe and started the chain of causes. One of those has to be true. Okay? Either A is true or B is true. There are no other options. Before I move this slide forward, I want you just to think about this a little bit. There is either an infinite series of causes going backward in time that has no beginning, or there has to be an eternal, uncaused cause that created the universe and started the chain of causes. Now, by the way, we're going to see soon that only one of these can be true. All right? But these are the only options. They're logically exhaustive. Every option that you can think of fits into one of these categories. Okay? Here they are again. An infinite series of causes goes backward in time in an eternal sequence that has no beginning, or an eternally existing uncaused cause created the universe and started the chain of causes. Now, if A is true, the universe itself is the eternal self-existing uncaused cause. Isn't that true? So, believe it or not, if this is true, it's really a subset of this, isn't it? If the universe itself is the eternal, self-existing, uncaused cause, then it really fits here. If there's an endless chain going back, and that is the physical universe, right? By the way, if everything is physical, and if every effect has a cause, and if there's nothing outside of the universe, the only way the whole thing could have started is if there was a cause to start it. But if there was a cause to start it, that's not the start. Right? So you just move back, and you move back, and you move back, and you move back. And what have you got? You've got a universe that is its own uncaused cause. Now, if B is true, the eternal, self-existing, uncaused cause is what we call God. And we're going to see strong reasons why this is the better option in a little while. Okay. Logic forces us to recognize the necessary existence of an uncaused cause. But scientists often ignore this fact, or they attempt to hide it. Okay. All right. Let's see how they do that. And by the way, when I say this, I'm trying to say this graciously. I'm not trying to say that scientists who don't have a theistic worldview are evil people. I am not saying that. I worked for years in the scientific field when I wasn't a believer. And there were lots of nice people there. And the fact that they didn't have a theistic worldview did not make them monsters. They were fine people, just like we are. And they were sinners, just like we are. I'm not saying that these scientists are evil people, but I am saying that they are either not thinking very well, or in some cases being intellectually dishonest when they make the kind of statements that I'm about to show you. Okay? Tricks and obfuscations. An obfuscation is a method of hiding something. Okay? Here's your typical non-theistic scientist. He's bald like me. Okay. You Bible believers say that God created the universe out of nothing. But we all know you can't create something from nothing. Science has shown us that the universe was created by the Big Bang. Now, by the way, my family lived in Homedale, New Jersey. Now, most of you have never heard of Homedale, New Jersey. It's a little town, but Homedale, New Jersey was the location of one of the largest installations of Bell Laboratories. Some of you have heard of Bell Laboratories. I used to work for Bell Laboratories when I was in college and after college. On a hill that's right next to a road that I used to ride over on my bicycle weekends when I would go to visit my cousin in the next town, there was a radio telescope. And that radio telescope was used by two scientists, I believe it was Penzias and Wilson, to measure the background temperature of the universe. And they measured that temperature at approximately 3 degrees above zero. And that measurement was the strongest confirmation for a theory which was developing at that time, which came to be called the Big Bang. Now, the Big Bang is a theory involving the early existence of the universe. But there's a trick here. Now look at the question, look at the statement again. You Bible believers say that God created the universe out of nothing, but we all know that you can't create something from nothing. Science has shown us that the universe was created by the Big Bang. You've heard this, right? You all heard this. This is a trick of words. The scientist has objected to our theory on origins, and he has offered in its place a theory regarding processes. The Big Bang is not a theory of origins. The Big Bang is a theory about processes. The Big Bang says there was this tiny blob of highly concentrated matter and it exploded. The Big Bang does not explain where the tiny blob of concentrated matter came from. It does not explain why it was concentrated. It does not tell you what shape it was. It does not tell you anything about where it came from. Right? This is nothing but an evasion of the question. Interesting, isn't it? By the way, it is possible that the Big Bang theory is partially correct. Maybe the process that scientists believe they see evidence for was part of the sequence of events that God used in creating the universe. Maybe when he spoke matter into existence, he spoke it into that tiny, highly compressed, hugely energetic blob. Maybe. All right? But you see what they've done? They've substituted, well, they've objected to our theory regarding origins, and they've offered in its place a theory regarding processes. They haven't answered the question, have they? Shocking. All right, here's another one. This is a biologist, by the way. This is a cosmologist. Okay? You Bible believers claim that God created life by his word in 6 days. Actually, it was less than 6 days, but we'll let him say that. However, science has shown us that life was created by Darwinian evolution. You've heard this, right? Same game. Darwinian evolution is not an explanation for the origin of life. Darwin's book is called The Origin of Species. Darwin's theory is a theory about an alleged process by which simpler life forms developed into more complex life forms. It says nothing about where the first life forms came from. Now, there's an additional theory that is sort of shoved in to solve that problem, and we'll talk about that next week. But they've done the same thing. Right? They've done the same thing. They have objected to the biblical explanation of the origin of life, and they have provided a physical theory about the development of life. This is very confusing, it's wrong, and perhaps it's intentionally deceptive. Right? Okay. Don't be fooled. By the way, just because a person has a PhD, just because a person wears a white lab coat, just because he is called a scientist and he's highly respected in his field, doesn't mean he's right about everything he says. Now, most scientists are experts in their field, and if their field is not origins, they're probably pretty good at what they do. But when it comes down to origins, I believe that non-theistic science has missed the boat. Okay? In the debate on origins, we need to think clearly, and we need to think logically. We must not allow others to cloud the discussion through flawed logic. So as you think through these issues, keep in mind the theories of process address the ongoing chain of causes, while theories of origins address the beginning of the chain of causes. They're two very different things. Okay? Next point. The existence of an uncaused cause is undeniable. Either the universe itself is its own uncaused cause, or there's something outside of the universe that is the uncaused cause of the universe. Now, I remember, when I was in grammar school and in high school, I used to argue with the Christian kids, and, they always say, how can you be an atheist? Everybody knows that God created the world. And I would, of course, shoot back at them, well, who created God? And they couldn't answer. Well, they could have done the same thing to me. They could have said, well, you think God didn't create the world, then where did the world come from? And I'd say, well, the world has always existed. I said, really? How could something always exist? See, this knife cuts both ways, doesn't it? Right? This knife does not prove the existence of God. It takes more than this to prove the existence of God. And by the way, proving the existence of God never converted anybody. Right? I do not think, nor do I ever attempt to convince an unbeliever to believe the gospel or just to start to believe in the existence of God by logical arguments. The problem with people who refuse to recognize the existence of God isn't that there isn't evidence, and it's not that they don't know that God exists. Did I read Romans 1 last week? Did I read Romans 1 last week? Okay, let me take you to Romans 1. I'll tell you a little story and read a couple of verses, and then we'll have our break. Okay? And please do consider preparing some kind of free will offering during the week. Romans chapter 1, starting with verse 18. I'm just going to read 3 verses. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, namely his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now, what Paul is saying here is that everybody knows that God exists. There is no such thing in the world as an atheist. There are people who call themselves atheists. I used to call myself an atheist. An atheist is a person who says, I know there is no God. Well, the reality is that everybody knows that there's a creator somewhere. Because everybody knows that he or she exists. Everybody knows that he or she didn't make himself. And that means that somewhere there's a creator. And by the way, they know their parents aren't the creator either, because their parents have parents. Now, what Paul is saying in Romans 1 doesn't mean that everybody has enough information to know what kind of God there is. We know that God is eternal. We know that he's powerful, because he had to be eternal to make what is temporal. We know that he has to be powerful to make things. But we don't know what kind of God he is. We don't know whether he is personal or impersonal. We don't know whether he's kind or whether he's cruel. Those kinds of things cannot be known just by looking at nature. How many of you like to watch like National Geographic programs and science programs and, seeing all the fascinating animals and places on the earth and how fish work and plants work and all, the natural world is fascinating, right? And you sit down to watch it with your 3-year-old child, and there's this great picture, there's a tiger there with its cubs. The mother is nursing the cubs, and they're cuddling and they're playing and everything is great. And then the mother goes out and kills an antelope and drags this bloody carcass back. So 1 minute you're thinking, oh, what a wonderful God to make these cute, cuddly little tiger cubs. And the next minute you could be thinking, ugh, what a horrible God to allow him to kill that antelope. So you can't know what God is like merely by looking at the universe, but you can know that he exists. And in fact, what Paul is saying, and Paul is the spokesman for God in Scripture, is that there's no such thing as an atheist. There are only people who tell themselves they're atheists even though they know better. Now, I teach 3 other classes every week, so I can't remember what I've said to my students. I don't know if I said this to you last week. Did I tell you about praying for the survival of my stepmother when I was 16 years old? Did I tell you about that? No. Okay. I'll tell you about this and then we'll break. I didn't come to faith in Christ until I was 26. And I didn't come to the point where I said, I can't be an atheist anymore, I have to be an agnostic, until I was about 20. When I was 16 years old, I went with my stepmother to train in whitewater canoeing. Whitewater canoeing is where you go through rapids in a canoe. Now, she and I were both very experienced canoeists already. We'd never done whitewater, but we knew how to handle a canoe. And we went down through the rapids after we were trained how to do it. We did just fine. There was a man there who had come, and he didn't have a partner to canoe with. So he asked my stepmother if she would take him down through the rapids. So she did. He was a total buffoon. He hadn't paid any attention to the instructions. He did not know how to paddle. They had gotten into the rapids not very far. He turned the canoe sideways. It rolled over, and then it disappeared around the bend in very rough water. Now, for the next 2 hours, I was waiting there, wondering whether my stepmother was still alive. I was afraid she had drowned. And as I sat there waiting, eventually they did come back. They got washed down the river 10 miles. They had to drag the canoe up on the bank and get somebody to hitchhike and bring the canoe back. So it was 2 hours until they came back. But during that time, I'm sitting there in my mind quietly saying, God, please don't let her be dead. Please don't let her be dead. And I was scared. Now, I'm the committed, convinced atheist praying to God. Why did I do that? Because I'm just like everybody else. I know that there is a God. And you don't have to have exposure to the Bible to know that there is a God. All you have to do is exist. There's no such thing as an honest atheist. Okay? I shouldn't say it that way. Anybody who tells himself that he is an atheist is being dishonest about that issue. That's a better way to put it, right? Sorry about that. That was much too strong a statement. That's why Paul says people suppress the truth in unrighteousness. It's like they're sitting on a box and the truth is in the box and the box is pushing the lid up and they're saying, nope, I'm sitting here. There's no truth around here. There's no God around here. Okay? All right, well, it is 8:36. We've gone over a little bit. We'll have a 10-minute break. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed or benefited from this study of science and the Bible, I hope you'll recommend it to others. See you in the next part of the series.